Well, again, thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit more about Legion and open buildings and some of our solutions that are being used now for social distancing.
Mhm.
So my name is Eduardo Lazarotto. I'm based out of our London office in the United Kingdom. Have been with Bentley for a couple of years now. I joined via the acquisition of Legion. That is actually the software that we'll be talking about today. But my role today is actually the product manager for our buildings brand. So pretty much all the design applications buildings are the products that I manage today. Being probably the biggest and most well-known one is Open Buildings Designer, is our flagship application. It's a BIM multidisciplinary platform, so a tool where architects, electrical, mechanical, structural engineers can actually collaborate in different types of buildings and building projects. And then we also have a few other applications. So we have a superset of that product that is specific for stations called Open Building Station Designer. We have Legion, there is the simulation of people movement in different types of contexts and spaces. We have an energy simulation application that is actually now being integrated into Open Buildings. We have a factory design application called Spidicon in Germany. And we have a facilities management application as well. So different products there under that brand.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about kind of the core of what Legion does. You mentioned it's kind of a people simulator, kind of what applications are people using that for?
Sure. So Legion has been in the market for over 20 years now, and over the years it has been used for all types of infrastructure. It started actually around 20 something years ago, very focused on train stations, as at that time we saw a big increase in public transport in big cities around the world. So what we did at that time was we installed cameras in different types of spaces. So train stations in New York, in Beijing, in Hong Kong, in London, but also in stadiums and airports to exactly measure or try to understand how people behaved in those spaces. So measuring the speed that they walk, how much space did they leave around them when it was too crowded, how did they approach an escalator or a lift, and how long did they queued for some activities and so on. And then with that information, we created the algorithm of Legion that actually what it does, it calculates each step of each of the individuals inside of a simulation model. So it can go and test dynamically the operation of a station, but also other types of infrastructure like airports, shopping malls, museums, schools, hospitals, and so on.
And I would imagine that for designers of buildings, that would be incredibly useful because, what you look at on paper may be completely different than, how people may react. Do you have any kind of examples of things that, people have learned using this that they maybe thought was good on paper and then turned out not to be?
Yes, absolutely. So I think there are many examples around people behavior and people movement when we look at some of the preconceived ideas that we
Mhm.
have about how will people behave and actually what happens in real life.
Right.
So one great example is the addition of barriers when we are getting the example of stadiums, for instance. Usually people consider that barriers will slow down if people are actually evacuating or leaving that stadium. But in the end, when we put together during the design process or the planning process, the simulation, and then we, of course, compare that with real life after the stadium is built and start to operate, we can clearly see a huge difference in spaces that have barriers and pretty much that help people making the decision of where to
Right.
go
Right.
and places that do not have those barriers. And the ones with barriers are much faster actually to evacuate people safely out of that stadium.
That's
Um,
very interesting, actually. It's that speaks to that kind of counterintuitive, but you can understand why that would work. Is that you've eliminated the step of people stopping and trying to
mhm,
decide, or just seeing something and not knowing what to do. That's very
mhm, mhm.
interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we also found out that there are things that look minor usually in the design phase that in the end make a big difference in very not necessarily crowded, but with a high footfall of passengers or people through space. So if you have 90 degrees corners, usually people will slow down as they are approaching because they cannot see what is around. So in many places, people in stations, for instance, they will just jump for the corners, so people can actually see a little bit further, and then they don't need to slow down. Um, Same thing happens with information boards, with wayfinding signage, with even the place where you position your staff. And nowadays, even more with Wi-Fi signal. Like we
Mm,
get some of our stations in London where you see some parts of the platform are very, very crowded,
yeah.
and other parts are very are not crowded at all. And of course, you want to distribute people so you don't get trains too crowded. So it's an interesting kind of like
Yeah.
learning process.
Yeah. And so I know that earlier this summer, you guys kind of decided to open up Legion to kind of assist people. What was kind of the rationale behind that, and what are you seeing people use this for? Kind of now that the world has changed a bit.
So I think, look, so back in March when, or February, March, depending on which country, all the social distancing and quarantine and other requirements around COVID started to show up around the world. We started very quickly at Bentley this team that we called kind of Bentley Has Your Back.
Hmm.
And we found some tools that we believed could help not only our existing users, but also other users in the market to adapt or to improve the deliverables that they had during this period. So we made two pieces of software available for free until the end of September, as I mentioned. One of them is ProjectWise 365,
Hmm.
is a collaboration platform that enables users to pretty much have their whole project that they would do in the desktop in the past in the cloud, and collaborate, pretty much having the right people getting access to the right data at the right time. And then right after that one, we actually made available OpenBuildings Station Designer and Legion Simulator, exactly because we saw this big demand from new users that either never used simulation before because they
Mm,
didn't have the type of asset, or because it was too expensive, or just because they were operating normally without all the
right.
social distancing requirements and they didn't see the need for that. But also from kind of like adjacent disciplines to buildings. Like we saw many architects starting to be interested as they were revisiting some of their designs for the future. We saw a lot of civil engineers that were already in the build phase of projects revisiting some of those projects. And of course, the number one requirement came from owner operators. So over the years, airports and train stations always used simulation, or have been using simulation for a long, long time, to deliver safely, to deliver the most out of their spaces. But then after COVID, we see supermarkets operators, we see
Right.
shopping malls, we see museum operators actually going and using simulation to answer some of those questions as well.
Right. And is there anything specific in Legion that helps with social distancing, or is it more they're using that modeling to figure out their own systems? Like, is there any kind of feedback that they get about distancing, or is it more kind of the general already feature set of what's happening in Legion?
Sure. So there are a few tools actually. So what we did is since March also we started investing in making the modeling of social distancing a little bit easier in Legion
Okay.
and the analysis of the results as well. So one thing that we haven't got yet, and a lot of people have been asking over the past couple of weeks and months, is the let's call it natural behavior of social distancing.
Oh,
And
okay. So observing people as they're being told to distance what they do, is that
exactly,
okay?
yeah. And the reason for that is because we don't know yet if that will become a natural behavior.
Right.
So at the moment, if we go to like supermarkets or shopping malls or stations, we have to see on the ground the sticker saying, okay, this is 2 meters from that one. So we know, or we have kind of like people telling us, keep distance, and signs everywhere, and information actually reminding us of that.
Right.
Because naturally we are human beings and we are wired to to actually be close to each other, not really to distance. So that is one thing that we haven't done yet. But as we said many times, if that becomes a new normal, and that will of course take some time for us, for different, even different countries or different cultures to adapt to that new normal, then of course we will go and measure again that behavior and we'll create that profile. But apart from that specific behavior of social distancing, pretty much any scenario that involves people movement inside of space can be tested with Legion. So we can go and create queuing systems and operation of the space, shops and activities and so on. And then what we can do with Legion is we can measure how many people broke the boundary of 2 meters or 1.5 or 1 meter with each other. We can understand how long did people stay too close to each other, what areas you had more risk of that happening, like an entrance, or if you already have specific requirements, like in countries like the UK or the US, we can very quickly test that design of that space for those requirements and see if they are actually matching those requirements.
Yeah, and I would assume that that would also, again, it would allow you to kind of calculate the risk reduction from design A versus design B, or kind of these different scenarios play out. Do you have, are you working with folks that are also doing office design? Because I've been working from home since March, and they've been kind of thinking about reconfiguring our office several different times and have not brought us back yet. So I'm just kind of curious because there's a lot of unused office space right now if people are also looking into that.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the reasons or one of the moves that one of the first things that we have done after the acquisition of Legion is actually we started to integrate it with OpenBuildings. There is the design platform, which is pretty much bringing the movement simulation or the planning discipline, as we usually call, closer to the BIM building. They are already kind of testing that building for evacuation and for operations and so on. So since we started with all the social distancing requirements, we have seen or actually three sides of application in the context of offices. One of them is air circulation, which is part of one other tool that we have that is energy simulation systems that is also freely available together with OpenBuildings, where it's pretty much you can go and test the amount of fresh air that is circulating inside of space and so on. So there are many requirements today, a little bit tighter because of COVID, and then of course you will have cases of hospitals or schools and so on that will have different requirements. Then another application is within our design platform, so OpenBuildings. You can use generative design tools like generative components from Bentley or other applications in the market like Grasshopper or Rhino and so on to very quickly analyze the design based on the space per person. So you can go and create circles of the
Okay.
amount of space around the table, and then very quickly you can check the clash detection between those spaces and pretty much a little bit static, a little bit dynamic, do the analysis of that space. And then the third one, of course, is Legion, with which you can do the full dynamic simulation. So in case of tall buildings, one of the risk areas is the lobby, the lift, and how do you operate a lift actually when you have many floors, and of course you limit the number of people that can use that lift and so on. So all of those questions can be answered using Legion.
Absolutely. So if someone has not, as you were mentioning, maybe some of the owner operators before have not done simulation, what would
Mhm.
you kind of tell them about what it can tell you, what it can't tell you, how easy it is, how easy is it, or what's the learning curve for getting up and running with that?
Sure. So I think in the very kind of basic level of Legion, the interface of Legion has always been pretty much mirrored in CAD systems.
Mm-hmm.
So both MicroStation and OpenBuildings, but also some of the other software around like AutoCAD and Revit and so on. So if the user has some knowledge of the design tool, the user will understand the interface of Legion. Um, then on the other kind of on the flip side, what we always say is that if the person knows the space, so if it's a station manager, a station designer, or a station planner, and when we say knowing the place is pretty much telling the software, okay, where are the trains and where are the stairs and where is the shop and how many people stop in that shop and all those types of knowledge that you need to have to be closer to the space to actually be able to answer. So if you have those two kind of basic knowledge pieces, then it's very quick to learn how to use Legion. Our basic training that takes you from zero to building a full station takes around 3 days.
Hmm.
We have that all available online, and the user can do it on demand. And then we have now, as part of this campaign, we have weekly sessions where the user can come and ask questions and take any issues to our team. But in terms of questions that the users can answer, many, I guess.
Yeah.
There are three groups of things that we usually say that simulation is very good for. The first one is safety. So any simulation, any model, the user can test the evacuation of space very quickly. So how long will it take to evacuate in the case of an accident, fire, or other emergency scenarios. And of course, now also calculates the distance and the the time that people are too close to each other and test that design against requirements. The other one is efficiency. So in the past, it would be a lot about the width of corridors, the number of stairs and escalators, which parts of my space would be too crowded for too long, and so on. But today, of course, we have a lot of other design elements in space. Like in restaurants, you will have screens between tables, or even in stations, you will have one directional flow systems inside of the station. You will also have separation barriers and other types of devices to keep people apart, away from each other. And the third one is commercial feasibility, or a kind of like commercial efficiency of space. There is questioning the model about which places can I position a new shop or a new advert, and how many people will actually see that. If 30% of my passengers stop to buy a coffee, will that create a queue that will actually stop people getting to their train, and all these types of questions that can be asked to a simulation.
It's funny, every time you give an example, I keep thinking of places where I've been in scenarios like that, and I'm like, man, I wish they had used that. There's a ferry terminal near us in Portland where there's two lines, and one is for the tickets and one's for the getting on the boat, and they always are crossing streams in a way that's very confusing. Um, but yeah, so the other thing I wanted to ask too is that, you have this support. It sounds like you have, this great tutorial support. And I think that there is some misconception that the idea of simulation is like very, very advanced. Like you have to, have a PhD in computers to kind of do this simulation. You touched a little bit on that support, but I think maybe to those who think it's, kind of out of their range, can you kind of speak to a little bit about what it's actually like to use it?
Yeah, sure. So there are a few steps when you are building a model, as we call. There are, I'd say, three basic components. One of them is the information about space.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty much the design of your building. And that can come from almost any source. So it can be a Revit file, an IFC file, a DWG file, a DGN file. So pretty much like all the leading design applications. If you already have your space design in one of those, we can import that file into Legion. Then there will be a step where you will define what are the activities, which is pretty much saying, okay, this is a stair, this is an escalator, this is how many people can go into that escalator, the speed of that escalator, and this is a lift, and how many people can go into that lift, and so on. And then there's a third step where we will go and create the, the, the families of entities or people that will go through that space. So I'll go and say, I have 500 people alighting a train per every 30 minutes in this station. And then out of those, 30% will leave the station, 40% will go and catch another train, and 20% will stop there and buy something in the station. Or I'll pretty much like tell a little bit the story of what happens in space.
Yep.
And then very quickly, what I'm doing is actually I'm creating what we call a base model. And then that will run as, I'll choose if I want to run that for 24 hours or for the peak time, usually like in the morning or in the afternoon. And then based on that base model, I can start extrapolating different what if scenarios. So what happens if that train gets canceled? What happens if a train has 1,000 passengers rather than 500? What happens if there is an accident or something happens? And after I create those scenarios, I can very quickly run those simulations and get all the results out of them.
So that's most of the questions that I have. Is there anything that you would want people to know about Legion, or about how they can use this for their own purposes for COVID planning that we haven't touched on? Is there more that you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think one important thing about and I guess this is it's a slightly bigger topic than just Legion. I think it's about all the different systems that we have in Bentley. But talking about the trend of industry and creating digital twins of
Hmm.
different pieces of infrastructure, usually there is this misconception or this idea that digital twins are very complex, that it takes too much time, that I have to go and change my whole infrastructure or my whole project to actually have a digital twin. And in reality, going digital is a process, is a journey. There are many, many steps and many different pieces of technology that can be used in that process. And simulation is one of them. I think one of the ultimate goals of digital twins is to have that digital twin of infrastructure that after it is built can keep being used for years to come to improve the operation of that infrastructure using simulation or other types of analysis software and so on. Um, so what we like to tell to people is, look, you can start very, very small. It doesn't have to be the whole project. It doesn't have to be your whole airport or your whole station or now supermarket or other type
Right.
of infrastructure. It can start very, very small. Like we have users like London Underground in London or NYCT in New York or MTR in Hong Kong that sometimes they do tests in very, very small scale. Like they go and get one escalator inside of a station,
Mhm.
and they do a simulation of that escalator and understand what is the best queuing system to get to that escalator and so on. And of course, then they can grow and do the full station or the full network or different parts of the network and so on. But what we like to say is that about simulation in general is that it's very modular, it's
Mhm.
very scalable. So the users can start very small and they can go big with time. And another very, very interesting thing is that once they build that base model, they have that base model forever. So
Right.
they can keep using that after social distancing and after, hopefully that will pass soon. But after that passes, they can still use that model for other applications,
Right.
for changing the location of things and to change the different spaces and to even for positive things like I mean using some of the opportunities that getting out of COVID and social distancing will bring, they can use simulation to start understanding how to implement those changes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for answering all my questions about this. This is, honestly, it's opened up for me too, because I've seen the demos of Legion. I went to a year of infrastructure last year, and I was like, that looks amazing. And then in my brain, I went, that looks really complicated. But it seems, it like you just said there, it's modular. It's something that people can get into, for a specific need or for a bigger, broader project. And I really think that that's going to be a powerful tool, like you said, both kind of in and out of our current scenario here. So thank you so much, Eduardo, for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you very much, Carla.
Thanks.